everybody, I'm Lisanne Miller with W Cushing and Company, and this is January's third Thursday with Lisanne. Welcome 2023. I hope everybody had a great holiday season, and we wish you all the best for 2023. So today we're going to be in the dye kitchen, and we're going to dye some yarn. But first, I hope that you got the latest issue of Rug Hooking Magazine, and I want to thank Rug Hooking Magazine for working in conjunction with me to put on Third Thursday with Lisanne. We thank them for their support and continued videos. This is a great issue, a lot of inspiration, a lot of different color palettes in here, a lot of patterns. Make sure you get your copy. So, we are going to dye yarn today. And in the book, Beautiful Wool in the Dye Kitchen with Lisanne, there is a section on dyeing yarn, but this is a little different, okay? This is, people have written to me and said, hey, listen, I have a ceramic top stove. I don't really have a dedicated space. I want to dye some yarn. I want to dye some wool, but I don't have an elaborate setup. Well, you don't need an elaborate setup. We're going to dye the yarn with just a few instruments. We're going to do a dip dye on the yarn, and you're going to use one pot. And it doesn't have to be a white pot. It can be a black enamel pot. It can be gray. It can be anything you would like. So you would just need a little table, like a card table or a tray. You would need 2 mixing cups, your spoon. Electric tea kettle is always a must. So make sure you invest in a good electric tea kettle and yarn. This is 100% Peruvian Highland wool. It is considered bulky by their standards. It's an Aran weight. And it is 100 grams, 137 yards. This is what it looks like dry. And we have soaked the yarn for 24 hours. Just like with the wool, you've got to open up. This is wound well. It's not loosely wound. So you have to make sure that you're going to get the dye all the way into the core of the yarn. Okay? So today I've picked to use red grape, our red grape yarn. And the formula, which I have right here, is we're going to, in our dye bath, we're going to make a dye bath in a 4 cup, okay? We're going to put in a teaspoon, a full teaspoon of red grape, mix in 4 cups of boiling water, add in a 1/4 cup of white vinegar. This is our dye bath, okay? This is called a quick set dye bath. We have put the mordant, or what's going to grab the dye, so when we start the dip dye of the yarn, it's going to go in very easily. And then you pour the dye bath into the dye pot with your water steaming. And this is a quick set dye, okay? So this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to get we have our 1 1/2 dye spoon, okay? And we're going to put that in. It makes it easier than having to do 4, having to do this or that. So we're going to open it up, make a funnel, and here's our 1, and we're going to pour it in, okay? Now, there we go. There we go. A little over, but we're good. So in there we go. Here is our salt. That cleans the dye spoon. Make sure you do that as soon as you do the dye. Seal it back up and put it in its package. I picked red grape. It's a beautiful color. It's really very nice. And also, it's kind of equates back to the color of the year, Viva Magenta. So we're going to pour this into 4 cups of boiling water. Okay, I'm going to do that. There we go. And I am at the 4 cups of boiling water, maybe a tad shy. I'm going to go right up to the line. Okay. So now I'm going to stir. And I have a bigger spoon today because we're going to need this for the yarn. Okay? There we go. Just like that. And look at that color. Beautiful color, nice rich color. Gonna look beautiful on the yarn. I am gonna put that in there. It's not gonna hurt it. And let that sit in here. We'll talk about that pot in a minute. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour ordinary white vinegar for the quick set. And I'm gonna put a 1/4 cup in. We want it to grab. So I'm putting it right into here. And now I've formed my dye bath. Here is my dye bath. It is a quick set dye bath. And now we're going to go over here where my spoon is. Okay, this is just a stock pot. You can use any stock pot. I have about 4 to 5 inches of water. It is steaming, but it's not boiling. We don't want it boiling. And I'm going to pour my entire dye bath in, just like that. Okay? So my entire dye bath is poured in. I'm going to make sure that we're okay with it. I want to make sure that my mordant is moved around. I can smell the vinegar, and look at the nice, beautiful, rich color. This red grape is just going to be a beautiful way to dip dye. Now this was from like a chafing dish. You can use a cookie tray. If you want to update your cookie sheets or your baking sheets, you could put a baking sheet here because we don't need a lot of depth. But anything, because we're going to put the yarn in that's a flat surface. The yarn has been soaking, and the yarn has an ability. I'm going to move it into this pan here. The yarn has the ability to stretch, and you have the string where the yarn is tied. Do not cut the strings, because if not, you're going to have a mess, and I mean a mess, and that's speaking from experience. So what we have to make sure, though, because we're going to use the string in the dip dye, when we get to the top, that we don't get any white in here, and I'll show you a little trick for that. So here we go. We're going in. And we're going to start. Now, I know I want to start there, so I'm putting my hand where I want the next one to drop to. So we're going to bounce it. I'm going to bounce it about 15, 20 times just to let it absorb, okay? And it's going to absorb nicely. It's taking the color nicely, and it's just going to keep going. And I think I'm ready to drop, so I'm going to drop to my pinch, and there's the next one. And I've pinched it again. And I'm doing about 20, 25. It's a little bit more than what you do a dip dye on the wool with, okay? And here's my pinch. You see my pinch, okay? And I'm going down to the pinch again. And I'm going to dip dye to that. This allows you to have a measure when you're dip dyeing and when you're dip dyeing the yarn. The pinch works really well. It's very simple to use, and you really do get a great graduation with it. Okay, then I'm going to go to the next one, and I have one more after this, so I'm on to this one. And it's working really well, and how you know it's working really well, the yarn that was on the bottom is floating around, which means it's absorbing the dye, and that's what you want, okay? You want the yarn to absorb the dye, float a little bit to the top. You don't need it to be a lead on the bottom. Then I go to my next pinch. Now the last pinch is where we get our big spoon in. And we need our big spoon, okay? And once we get into here, as you can see, I'm gone to my pinch, okay? And I'm kind of letting it set in there. It's not as quick as using it. Yes, it is a quick set dye, but I'm kind of letting the yarn absorb it. Now, I'm going to do this. And why I'm going to do this is I don't want that string where I've been holding it tight to leave a white mark. And this one you can do the least amount, like that. And yes, you're going to have dye. It's not going to run clear at first. You're going to have dye coming off of it because there's still a lot of dye in the pan. Now, if you don't want to dye 2 skeins, you can use a half a teaspoon of dye. But I like to dye 2 skeins, or you can even dye 3 skeins, okay? So as you can see, it's starting to run a little bit clearer. And there we go. So now I'm going to move this right next to my pan. Okay? And I'm going to take my spoon and I'm going to move down just like that. And it is starting to run a little clearer. Let it run a little bit. And that's why this is easy for any kitchen. You don't have to have a dye kitchen. It's one pot, one pan. Now let's take a look at this one. So here we go. You can see the graduation. My main concern is to check to make sure I don't have white where the string is, and I don't. And I know I don't have it down there because it was in the pot for so long and it wasn't held taut. How do you know you've been successful with this? You can see that the string was dyed red grape. And by the string being dyed red grape, everything underneath it was dyed red grape. So here's a beautiful graduation, a little bit darker. This is the richer tone. And now we're going to take the second skein. Now, just suppose there was white there. If there was white there, all you're going to do is take and spoon like that. And wherever the white was that you may have missed, you're just going to spoon it right on. Remember, this is a quick set. The mordant's already in there. And you're just spooning it on like that, and it will take. So there we are. It's steaming, it's done. This is the richer of the two. The next one, of course, will be lighter because it is the second one. Okay? So, here we go. And if it's your first time dip dyeing, you don't have to be concerned about it being so even. You're just concerned that you don't have straight lines across, that they bleed. And I do like to put a little, not so much of the water in here. I do like to make it so it's just a little bit pulled tight, but not completely rinsed out. And here we go. And here we go again. So now you get your hand situated. You're in my next one, and here we go. And we got to make sure we got this up even. There we go. So here's my next pinch. There we are. Now you're already going to be able to tell that it's lighter, and that's okay. This way you have two skeins, and if you hook with yarn, this is great. This is equivalent to shading, and you can do a lot with it, and you can do it in all colors, any color you'd like. If you wanted to do it where you're going to whip it and you wanted it graduated as well, you can do that. You know, this is 100% wool yarn, so yes, you can hook with it. That's very important. But a lot of times with the yarn, you don't get the graduation of color, and this allows you to get the graduation of color and to hook. This would be a beautiful sky if you were doing silhouettes. Or use it for leaves and scrolls if you hook with the yarn. If you Oxford punch, it will punch like a dip dyed piece of wool. So you're actually getting the benefit of that. Here we go. And I'm going to come down one to this pinch. And you can see it's much lighter than the first one, which is awesome. It just depends if you like the darker one or the lighter one. If you only want one skein and you want the lighter one, you'll go to a half a teaspoon. We put a whole teaspoon in, but you would go to a half a teaspoon. So that's the other thing that you can do. Time to get my big spoon. You can use a wooden spoon. It doesn't have to be metal, but if you use a wooden spoon, you can go to the Dollar Tree, get a few of them for $1.25. Just make sure you don't use it with food. It's only would be for your dyeing. Okay? But you don't have to have a special metal spoon. But also the Dollar Tree does have these large metal spoons if you like this. I like the large metal spoon because I get a good balance on it. And I get a way to make sure that I'm getting it even. I'm not directly over the boiling water. Okay, I think we're about done here with that too. Okay, so I'm going to take this, which is a little bit cooler on my hands, move it, and look at that. The water is clear. and that's a good thing. And you'll see when I put it in the pan, it's a tad lighter. I move it over into the pan. Here's our second one, and yes, it is steaming, but you can see it's a lot lighter. So now what I have to do is check the string. And I am going to check the string to make sure we don't have any white marks. Now, my string is dyed, as you can see, but it's not fully dyed. And I see some little bits and nibs and nabs. You can leave that if you wanted the highlights, or see how different the color is for this one. You can just put some of that on if you'd like. Okay. It is dyed, but if you want it just a tad darker, you can do it just like that. Again, this is a quick set dye, so the mordant's already in. So there's our two skeins. Here's our darker one, here's our lighter one, and they look really nice. They look nice together. Now, there is some dye left in the pot. God forbid we leave any dye in the pot. I always, when I'm dyeing, whether it's wool or whether it's yarn, I keep my nibs and nabs. I keep all my little leftovers, and I soak them when I soak my yarn. And I just drop them in, and I'm going to drop in another one, just like that. Now, you may say, well, what good does that do? It's not a dye formula, it's not repeatable. No, it's not repeatable, but what you get is just gorgeous, and it can be used as a one-of-a-kind in your rug. It can be used, if you had another skein, you could just put a skein in for the lightest value. But what I'm doing is I'm just stirring it around a little bit. It won't be super mottled. It won't be like a spot dye, but it will have some mottling in it. You make sure it's open so it doesn't fold onto itself, as you can see what I'm doing. And look at the beautiful, beautiful color. And the reason why I do this color is absolutely perfect for cheeks or flesh tone. So everybody asks, what's my flesh tone formula? This is my flesh tone formula. I use the exhaust of reds and pinks, and this is called the exhaust. I use this exhaust, I put in my nibs and nabs, and I let them sit, and then it picks up beautiful, beautiful. You can never have too many different values of flesh tones or cheek tones. This would also work for flowers. It would work for scrolls. It would work for just about anything. And there is still a little bit of color in there, not much. So I'm not going to put another piece of wool in because it would just tint it. I'm just going to let this sit. And if I shut off the pot and let it sit overnight, the colors will deepen. So I didn't use all of it. This is for another day. And that's okay. But you always make sure you have this, and this way, look at all you got from one pot, one pan, and your electric tea kettle and a measuring cup. So you really don't need to have an expansive dye kitchen to have some fun. And we're going to go back over here, and I'm going to show you what these look like dry. I had dyed some earlier, and these are dried, and I'm going to tell you about drying them in a minute. So this is the darker one. And it's got its graduations, and as you can see, it's got its graduations from dark to light. It's very nice. And here is the lighter one. Now the lighter one here goes like that when it's dry. So you've got two beautiful skeins of yarn, one pot, measuring cup, one dye spoon, one dye. And then you'll have your nibs and nabs as well. So, the red grape, you do a quick set dye bath, 1 teaspoon, 4 cups of boiling water, a 1/4 cup of vinegar in the dye bath. That makes it a quick set. You pour it into your steaming pot of water, about 4 inches of water in the stock pot. You mix it, and then you start your dip dye. It just works just lovely. It's a lovely thing. It's easy. You don't need a huge dye kitchen for it, but you get a lot out of it. Now, to dry the yarn, you'll go to your sink or you'll go outside. You wring it out really well. You can rinse it with lukewarm water. Do not shock it with cold water. lukewarm to warm water, and you can let them hang outside if it's not freezing. You can let them hang in a shower, on a drying rack, or in this time of year in front of your wood burning stove. Just don't set it too close. And once they dry, you can wind them into cakes, or you can wind them into a ball, whatever you'd like, and they're ready for you to use. So I hope you've enjoyed this die lesson. I've enjoyed doing it with you, and I hope to see you next month. February, we're going to go back over some tools of the trade, some different things that you can use. We're going to talk about hooks. We're going to talk about some frames. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. So join me next month. I hope you've enjoyed this month, and have a great rest of January. Bye for now.